Great. We'll go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to MIT Sloan Alumni Online. This is our first session of the academic year, and we're very pleased to have Dr. Matt Beane, a PhD alumnus of MIT Sloan, on the program today. We'll be discussing Matt's research work and recent book titled The Skill Code: How to Save Human Ability in the Age of Intelligent Machines. Jackie Selby from the Executive MBA class of 2021 will be our moderator for today, and she'll lead us through a series of prepared questions and conversation with Matt. You will be able to add your questions to the Q&A panel in your Zoom interface, and feel free to leave comments in the chat as well. Matt and Jackie, thank you for being with us. Without further ado, Jackie, I will go ahead and turn it over to you.
Well, Greg, thank you very much. And also a special thank you to the External Relations Office for your ongoing partnership in this series. And thank you to everybody for taking the time out of your day to be here. It really is a privilege to have Matt here with us today to discuss the future of work and human interaction with machines. And, in today's current environment with artificial and machine intelligence, Matt, your work is even more important and salient. And you bring such a wealth of knowledge and research and professional experience to the space that we are very fortunate to have you with us today. And as we prepared for the conversation today, I was really struck by the incredible balance and practicality as well as the actionable insights that you provided. And I think it's something that really resonated with me and is unique to this topic. And as a result, I have been just incredibly eager for our discussion today and for our audience members to be able to learn from you, as I have been lucky enough to. So Matt, without further ado, thank you very much for taking the time to be with us today and to share your insights.
Delighted, Jackie. I was really, it was quite a moment, a life moment actually, to get the request to do this at all. I still feel the intensity of my MIT experience like it wasn't too long ago. And so to get a call back from that institution to come speak to alumni, it's really quite something. It's a treat, it's a privilege. And to all the folks on the line, I'm delighted to connect with you, and I appreciate you making the time.
Well, thank you very much. We are so glad that you were here. And before we get into the questions, would love for you to just share a little bit more about just your background and personal experiences that will inform our discussion today.
Sure. I'll just say, probably like many folks on the call, my love affair with technology began when I was a little kid. I consumed mostly a mix of science and science fiction with my free time. And of course, as soon as video games became a thing, that became part of the diet as well. But so that's part of the explanation as to how I've landed where I've landed. I think the questions of education, skill development, and learning were also really central in my household. Both my parents were educators for various stretches, and we're trying to build newer, better versions of an educational experience while I was a kid. So those questions weren't just sort of, I didn't just have collateral contact with them, like there was material being on the coffee table about those topics. That was just a casual topic of conversation as a kid. So the education, learning, times, advanced technology question came very early. I was a principal in a consulting firm when I decided to apply to graduate school. This is to fast forward quite a bit. And I was around, I'm dating myself now, for the advent of the BlackBerry, which I saw pretty dramatically, had dramatic implications for how the executive teams I consulted to treated each other, made decisions, shared information, things like that. And obviously not all to the good. And then I started to read material about technological trajectories, the likely implications of this kind of stuff for the world of work. And amongst other things, I came across some work from Sandy Pentland's lab. He was in the MIT Media Lab at the time, running a human dynamics group, and he published a book called Honest Signals, which involved using new classes of sensor and data to make predictions about social interaction that were wildly more accurate than what we had before. I remember, in fact, one system called Meeting Mediator, which gave all participants in a meeting via a cell phone screen real-time feedback on how much time they were speaking in a conversation. This was in 2007, 2008. Real-time feedback, and it told you how good a job you were doing at taking turns with the other people in your group and whom you were sharing the mic with. And this had the instant effect of leveling participation in groups. Once they all had this information, they changed the way they interacted. And that was 40% of my job. I mean, objectively, I would come into executive retreats for a merger and acquisition or some other sensitive conversation, and I played traffic cop. I mean, a high-paid traffic cop for conversation. Everyone with their consent and support. Some people talk more and less, and they all had agreed that and anyway, I thought my profession had a half-life. I had a real moment where I thought, wow, we're in for a lot more change than I expected. So basically decided to, with my wife's nudging, a very intelligent nudging, I just sent off applications to graduate school to sort of nuke my consulting career and pivot towards the implications of AI specifically and robotics. Both of those were in my application essay. And in particular, I was interested in how we built skill and learned. And that's all survived contact with MIT. And then all my research since has been focused on going to places, occupations, industries, organizations that are sort of earlier to the intelligent technologies party, but in a systematic, not accidental way, so that we could understand the patterns there that might generalize or could reasonably be generalized to other sectors of the economy. So right within 6 months, I was doing my first study of a robotic telepresence system in a post-surgical intensive care unit. And every study since then has involved, in the beginning, more robots with very limited AI, and now it's inverted. So the last 2-3 years has been exclusively disembodied AI and questions of learning and how we get our jobs done.
That's fascinating. Thank you very much for sharing that context and perspective for all of us. Appreciate it. So let's move into the questions. And when you're preparing for our discussions today, you shared with me that your initial interest in this human interactions with machines and work and human interactions in general, you were specifically interested in that expert-novice relationship. So could you share a little bit more about what fascinated you about this relationship? And were there things that you found to be consistently true in those relationships that made them successful?
Right. So the on its face, I've realized that there's a myth in our culture, which is that skill and learning come from formal educational experience, classes, books, self-teaching, and so on. And it's obviously not false. Those are not, those are really necessary modalities for modern society. We couldn't be where we are without them. But the research on how and where we develop skill being the ability to reliably produce valuable behavior under pressure, i.e. uncertain circumstances and so on, that is the research there has really been very clear for decades now that comes doing a job, solving real problems alongside people who have different or more expertise. And it is taken for granted because of that, because it's very tacit. You don't have to call it an apprenticeship. That's a very, very rare set of circumstances. Relationships can be very short-lived. You might have a day-long project you do with someone, or even a few hours. But if they really know more and that relationship is working well, that's where you build skill that, in fact, the next time you try, you're just going to be able to do that thing reliably. And so it's funny, I mean, because partially I was raised in alternative educational contexts where we've known that problems-focused or problem-centered learning has been the primary engine for skill development since the 40s or 50s. And we've had schools like Montessori and Waldorf and so on that since then have sort of had joint problem-solving across expertise levels as being the primary engine. It's just really expensive to do in a school. It's hard to scale. So that was baked into my head. I arrived in graduate school. I ate all of the literature and research that there was about skill and learning and so on. And of course, it reinforced that. So I never really had in my head anything other than this expert novice collaborative connection on real problems as being the engine for skill. So now I'm realizing I've drunk my own Kool-Aid a little too much. The book helped me sort of externalize that a bit and really re-encounter the world where it's at, which is if you look at our investment patterns in a business or in an economy, where do we spend our money and time to try to improve skill development? School, classes, online learning, books, TikTok. These things can get pretty close to that territory, but they aren't in it. And typically, the typical number in an organization in terms of its investment in understanding and enriching that relationship is zero, like actually none. So I'm focused there because that's what the research says and trying to understand it and how it's changing given new technologies. But even focusing there is counterintuitive for some.
Fascinating, thank you. Well, so building upon this, and you just alluded to it, how do machines potentially impact this relationship, whether positively or negatively?
Right. How do technologies impact that relationship? The main, if I had to sort of summarize the core finding in all of my studies and all the studies I've consumed, I've now covered over 30 sectors of the economy, different occupations, technologies, industries, and so on, is novice optional, those two words. And so practically, intelligent technologies in particular, but all forms of automation, actually, if you look back across history, allow a single expert to do more valuable work faster, some combination of those two things. They can solve more of the problem faster or at higher quality. And practically, that means they need less help from a novice to accomplish the task. Historically, it's only been marginally less. So there's plenty of room for that novice to be strictly required for the work. Like you can't do the job unless that novice is there. I'll get very concrete, but not too graphic, and I'll refer to a bunch of surgical research I did, which is that the previous version, i.e. previous is like a 2012 version of surgery, required 4 hands. To do a surgical job, you needed a medical resident who was doing what most people think of as surgery, like incisions or suturing and so on, the sort of pointy end of the spear. And the senior surgeon is actually doing what they call providing exposure, which is to say to make the next move more obvious to their partner. Working together, that's how you accomplish the surgical job, even with pretty modern tools. The introduction of robotic surgical technologies, in particular, I studied the Da Vinci surgical system, allowed a single surgeon to do the entire procedure themselves, from basically attaching the robot to the patient, needed a little help. From there until the procedure was done and the robot's removed from the patient, they are at a control console and can do everything themselves. Practically, part of the reason for that is they have 4 arms to control, not 2. Like you and I can both control 2 arms, but if you own this robot, you can use your feet and your hands to control those 4 arms. And that means that novice, a resident who has burned their life to get to that moment to really learn how to do surgery, sits and watches for 4 hours, or if they're lucky, they operate for 15 minutes. Whereas before, they'd be operating in some meaningful way, collaborating on the problem for 4 hours. And I've since seen this problem in investment banking, beat cops and policing, online education, you name it, many bomb disposal, many different areas of the economy. But the core problem is the technologies are so potent now, especially ChatGPT and similar forms of Gen AI are a great sort of much more florid example of this and are operating at much greater scale. They're so potent that the expert really, the novice has no required role in the work. And if you ask an expert, when is the right time to introduce that novice to your work, someone who by definition will make more mistakes and be slower, and it's optional. You don't have to do it. When would you like to slow down and make more mistakes is the question every expert now has to confront. And the answer practically is never. Of course, you can have good intentions. It's up to the willpower now, though. And it's a painful sacrifice for an expert to make to say, I don't have to involve you, but for the good of our occupation, the good of our organization, the good of recruitment. There are these sort of second order concerns you might have, like attracting talent. Now I have to involve a novice, but I don't need to. That's a very different game. And so for that novice, that is really, that's existentially problematic for their skill development.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So building upon kind of skill development, in your book, you talk about challenge, complexity, and connection as being the essential building blocks to developing the most valuable skills. So could you elaborate on that a bit more?
Sure. So the way to think about the book is that it is a play in 3 acts. The first chunk of the book, that first third, articulates the 3 amino acids. You can see on the cover, there's a DNA sort of metaphor of humans and machines. But in DNA, we have amino acids are the basic building blocks of life, of biology. And in skill development, we have these 3 C's. In English, thankfully, it worked out that you have challenge, complexity, and connection. Each of these get assembled in different ways in different contexts. And there are some patterns that are typical, but not always and not required. But challenge is and this comes from my own research, but also I had the luxury of spending a 1.5 years reviewing all science about skill development and learning. And we all roughly agree. Challenge is working close to the edge of your capability, but not at it, close to it, where you are not performing at your best and you are profoundly focused and uncomfortable. It is not a fun experience to be challenged, but it is strictly necessary for your skill development. So in that chapter, I go into detail there. And in each of the chapters associated with these 3 C's, I list a 10-point checklist of what the research suggests you'd need to see in practice to know it was healthy. So that's challenge. Complexity is kind of perpendicular to challenge, whereas challenge is about getting good at a specific task and being focused on, say, knot tying or doing financial valuation in a merger and acquisition, or whatever the skill is you're trying to get good at. Complexity is about digesting the broader universe of skills and roles and work that you're embedded in so you understand the system. And that way you can tackle surprise and collaborate more effectively. So for instance, if you're working on a manufacturing line, you start to learn a little bit about, you look left and you learn about shipping and receiving. Or you might get curious about the finance of the organization. How does this place make money? Or you might start to notice team dynamics. Maybe that's something you're interested in. Bottom line, you build capabilities that are complementary to the one that you're focused on. And you take time to reflect and process what you're learning. It's not about, you need to digest that complexity in ways that sort of allow you to metabolize it. So that's complexity. And the third is human connection, which is very, put simply, bonds of trust and respect between human beings. We don't often think of human bonds as having anything to do really with your skill development, although ask a teacher whether that's true or not, and they'll tell you a story. But practically in the research, it's also very clear that in 2 senses, your human connection matters for your skill development in that an expert gets to decide. So part of it's about access. An expert gets to decide if you are going to even get an opportunity to try. They have to respect and trust you enough to give you a shot. So, so there's that part of it, but the other part's motivation. So if you're a novice trying to learn, part of what motivates you to get better is not just doing the job better, it's earning the trust and respect of that expert. You look up to them. Part of what gets you excited in the morning to get up and be effective and to get better is to earn their trust and respect. And it works in both directions. So experts are also nourished by the trust and respect that they earn from the novice. So those 3 things put together, again, in different ways, in different sequences, in different contexts, are strictly necessary for healthy skill development. And that's, it's called, the book is called The Skill Code. Those 3 C's are the skill code.
I love what you said, particularly around building connection. It's just so critically important, and you're right, often overlooked. So building upon that a bit more, in your research and experiences, how do you believe machines will impact the future of work?
Right. Well, so how machines will impact the future of work, I'm going to unpack that in two ways. So the first is, and this is a critical distinction I learned to make in research, but I think is also very useful in the public discourse. Machines aren't going to impact anything, ever. They haven't. They might in the future, and I'm being pedantic here, but I think it's an important point. Humans pick up technologies and do stuff with them. That's how technology has an effect in the world. So in my case, the robotic surgical device, that didn't cause novices not to get a chance to do surgery. It was the surgeon's choice not to share control that caused that outcome. Now, you can design technologies in a way that make skill enriching outcomes more likely or less likely. You can design workflows in ways that make it more or less likely. So I think at least until technology starts to advocate for itself and ask for rights and organize and so on, we should treat technology as inert, but a very potent instrument for how we produce effects in the world. So that's part one. In the short run, I'll answer the short run and then the long run. In the short run, if you bought everything that I've said up till now, roughly, and what's in the book and the research associated with it, then in the short run, what we should be expecting right now at great scale is significant impairment in the taken for granted learning transfer that occurs between expert and novice as they do their work, because that novice is optional. Practically speaking, that means in something like 2 to 5 years. It takes a while for that novice to mature to the point where they're supposed to go work independently as an expert. When those people start washing up on the shores inside organizations, across organizations, in professions and occupations, there's going to be a debt to be paid. The novice won't be ready for duty. They might not be confident enough to try, and they may not be competent. In some cases, especially since they have AI in their hands now, in ways that are not obvious to someone trying to make a hiring decision or trying to make a project assignment decision. But practically, their talent at best will be fragile, brittle, thin, and it won't be super clear that that's the case. I can speak to this happening because surgery sort of went early with robots and AI, so to speak, and it is now paying this price in the form of remedial training for surgeons when they arrive after their residency, when they arrive at the hospital they're going to go work in. So in many, many cases now, a new resident who has finished their residency and basically watched movies about robotic surgery for 5 years will arrive at their hospital that has bought one of these robots and is expecting ROI on it. And so that surgeon will be expected to use the tool. And yet everybody locally recognizes they're not ready to run the show themselves. And so they'll take a senior surgeon offline to proctor that person. This is a term that's often used. For the first 3 months or so of their robotic surgical work, that senior surgeon is in the room with them, really sort of actually getting them up to speed and working with them in this expert novice way. That is quite costly. So it's costly to the institution because that expert could be saving lives and doing other cases instead of helping. So you're basically treating half the number of patients you could, and it's costly in terms of dollars to that senior surgeon. Are they getting paid? They get their piece rate. Surgeons are piece rate operators. They get paid per procedure, basically. So they're sacrificing income potentially, and the organization is making less throughput, less ROI, and so on. So right now, for instance, in that profession, hospitals are absorbing this cost. It's not obvious that's going to happen that way in all industries, that intensively. It might be worse. It might be not so bad. We just don't know. We don't have data. But the sort of medium-term answer that I'm very confident about is that right when the human species needs to be building skill the most, we need to be building new skill with all of these new technologies. How do they fit into our job? How is this changing how I should do my job? The very engine we depended on has been deeply compromised through this novice optional thing. And folks will struggle to learn in ways that are not well measured or understood. And now through the next 10 years, we will see increasing consequences of that, I think. You asked a future-oriented question, but I've been talking long enough. So why don't we go wherever you think we should go next?
No, I really appreciate your insight there, and it's a scary proposition. But given everything we've said, what skills then should we be focused on developing? How do we kind of mitigate some of the potential dangers?
Right. Well, so this is going to be an annoyingly meta answer, but anybody who's saying that they know the skill that is strictly required to navigate the future with AI and intelligent technologies in the changing world of work is selling you something because things are changing too fast. Um, Prompting, like how do you do prompting, for instance? There are lots of classes where people will help you part with your money to learn something that is probably somewhat useful, but the half-life of that skill and its value is quite short because these systems are improving and so on. So my best answer, if you look at ground zero for me, which is the classes that I teach master's students and PhD students now at University of California, Santa Barbara, are what is necessary for your healthy skill development, and let's work on your skill at building skill. Like learning to get good at learning is the ultimate play. Do you understand how you build skill? What's required for that? That's a cognitive, like an understanding thing. But then there are practices associated with building skill. They are listed in those 3C chapters, like 10, those, when I said there is a 10-point checklist, each one of those 10 items is a behavior you can engage in, and it takes practice to get good at it. So getting very good at diagnosing a situation like, is skill development going to be healthy for me over here? That's a diagnostic capability. But then I'm in the moment. I am either not the novice or the expert. What do I need to do to preserve that healthy skill development for myself and for others? That's a skill. Like in the moment, you can do it well, superbly, not so well. So getting good at that will allow you both to keep up on the latest developments and decide whether engaging with them is important. But it will also help you in whatever job you're doing to build the next set of skills that are going to be useful. And I think probably more importantly, you'll be in a much better position to help other people who are not so equipped, right? To be more effective in the extreme formal case, say a mentor, that's a very long-lived relationship that is very rich and intensive, down to just, I'm collaborating for one little job with this person who's new to the role, and I have 6 hours with them. How can I interact with them that will both get the job done and leave them with more independent capability by the end of the job? That, I think, is the master skill. There's just too much change too fast. And now different people have different beliefs about this, and I recognize that, and I'm happy if my leaning turns out to be wrong. But my intuition, based on the data I have access to, is that the bulk of the technical change associated with this technological wave we're going through is in front of us, not behind us. So ChatGPT and the like and Gemini are sort of the warm-up act for what's to come. If that's, and of course, it could be that it's behind us. Still, I think the skill of building skill would be useful. But if it's in front of us, then it's really, really important.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, building upon that, many of the people in the audience today are likely managers. So what advice would you share on how they should develop their teams and also their company culture in today's environment?
Right. So there are a few parties in this equation who have disproportionate power and therefore can really shape our trajectory. And I think managers are one of them. There's a few, I'll just name them and then go to managers. One is, in addition to that, are folks who are building the technologies and commercializing them that we're all increasingly relying on, or at least experimenting with. So technologists play a really critical role in addressing the challenges and opportunities I just described. People who are in charge of the standards for a profession or occupation, like what counts as good work, those people also have a lot of power because they're the ones who can decide what are the processes that we will insist on. An expert, someone who's ready for duty, having gone through so that we can certify them as being ready to do so. So those are two other parties I think that policymakers are another. And I can get more into that later, but the point is that in a certain sense, the way business operates now, this is you, dear manager, whether you mean it or not, and it's if you're in charge of a profession, it's whether you mean it or not, same with technologists, but there's this negative externality, if you will, of the way that we put intelligent technologies to work, which is it cuts off this informal learning process. No one quite pays the price for that. That's how climate problems have worked. That's how any sort of pollution and so on. If you don't bear the immediate cost, then you can just produce that. The government has a critical role in dealing with that. So I would say policymakers are another. Back to managers. You can do two things, I think, and they're of equal value, or they're both significantly valuable. One is you can take your precious time and devote it to figuring out the extent to which the issues I've been talking about and that are in the book are real in your context. A little bit of effort burned on assessing your local situation will yield a great return for you. It will help you make database decisions about, like, how much do we need to worry about this? How much is this novice optional problem really showing up? In what places and in what ways? You can direct people and resources to going to get good data. So that's part one. Part two is finding places where you're doing it once you have that picture, where is it going particularly well? It will be. There are pockets in your context where things are going stupendously well for skill development, and people may be complaining about it. Remember, challenge is uncomfortable. It's annoying. Complexities can be overwhelming. And so on. Or I have so much one-on-one time with my boss. Well, in fact, that's where you're building your connection, right? So you have to listen to the signals very carefully. But once you have that picture, you can figure out where, if we're doing it right, can we scale those successes? How is it possible to take those practices that we hadn't quite thought of that way, but invest to spread them more broadly? And the other is if there are areas where challenge, complexity, or connection are particularly unhealthy, especially with the push to remote work these days, that times the dynamics that I'm just describing can leave junior people really feeling very isolated, and in some cases, depressed, right? It can lead to a really serious loneliness and mental health issues. But barring that, if you see places that are worth your attention, you can intervene on them. Now, that's part one. The second part for managers, I think that is taken for granted and is an incredible source of power, is you get to decide whether to buy these systems and how to deploy them. You're investing on behalf of your organization and your customers. And there's a particularly powerful question you can ask any tech vendor who's coming to sell you your 5 or 10,000 or 20,000 licenses of Copilot or what have you, which is, how could we implement your technology, or how could you design your technology in a way that got us a productivity gain and enhanced the skills of our people the more that they used it, such that at the end of every week, using your system as it's installed in our organization will leave people upskilled rather than deskilled. I have a post on my Substack called "Don't Let AI Dumb You Down." And it basically makes the argument I've been making in the book about generative AI. The Substack URL is wildworldofwork.org. And in that post, I basically show that if you use ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude out of the box the way that it's designed, you will be subtly deprived of challenge, complexity, and connection the more you use it. And that is easy to fix, trivial for you as a user. You can go in and enter the equivalent of custom instructions so that it will nudge you in directions that are involve more healthy challenge. In other words, you sure you want me to do this, or do you want to struggle with it yourself for a bit? That's annoying, but it's actually the right guidance. Or on the case of connection, I can say, I love that I'm speaking to MIT alum. Like, we resonate with the term nerd. I'll just say that. And so I identify myself as a geek or a nerd. I would just say, SpaceX launches and lands rockets right nearby me in Santa Barbara at Vandenberg Air Force Base. And watching the boosters return to Earth is stunning, but it's hard to know when they're going to do that. So I tried to write a Python script to get that done. By the way, I hadn't coded in Python in about 10 years, but this is now straightforward. And because I had configured ChatGPT this way, it said, are there other human beings you could connect with about this enthusiasm within, say, 30 miles of you, rather than just me? That's only because I had sort of reprogrammed it, right? So as a manager, you have the power before you write the check to say, go away, come back in a week, and come back with even a notional plan as to how you might change your product and the way we implement so that our people are upskilled slowly over time. Most vendors, so far as I know, will go, huh? That's a good one. Haven't heard that yet. Well, you're prescient, you're looking ahead, you see this problem, help them understand it and help them get market advantage, by the way. And so if there are any technologists listening, people who actually build and commercialize these technologies, you can invert this message for yourself. There is huge market advantage to any technologist building a giant AI model to say, we've reconfigured our UX and the way of dealing with our systems such that in addition to these marvelous productivity gains, humans using this will build more skill. And in some cases, yes, that means it'll slow things down. But in what cases? And could it be faster if it also involved skill building? Possibly. We don't even know yet. So anyway, as a manager, though, you're at the end of the day, if you don't write the check, that skill depriving technology, or at least the way of deploying it that will deprive technology, just won't occur in your context until you say yes. And you can just make it a criteria for implementation. So I think right now, when everyone's supposed to be doing something about AI, you have to invest. You have to do something. Pushing back and asking for better, more on both of these things, that's a very powerful choice.
I love what you just said. I think it's really, really smart. And just thinking about, you know, how do you skill up your workforce and how does AI potentially negatively impact that is just such an important reminder in today's world. So thank you. And kind of building upon that too, could you elaborate on a bit more? How potentially does the proliferation of AI change anything from what you just discussed?
Okay, wait, can you repeat that again? How does the implementation of AI, is that what you said?
No, proliferation. So if AI continues to become adopted at a rapid rate, how does that change anything from what you've just discussed?
Well, so the immediate and obvious conclusion is the more extensive and capable we have AI deployed, AI becomes, and the more broadly deployed it is, the more intensified these issues are going to become. So I have a colleague and friend who's also an MIT PhD alum, Daniel Rock, who's down at Wharton, and he and colleagues at OpenAI wrote a paper recently you may have heard of called GPTs are GPTs, which is basically what they do there is they show across all known jobs and tasks which are most exposed to AI. And exposed there means if you used AI, you could do at least 50% better in that subtask of your job, right? So it's not like you're exposed to getting eliminated. It means, in fact, the opposite. It's like you have a huge upside in what percentage of your tasks. Their calculation for the first wave of generative AI, i.e. ChatGPT 4, that wave, was that for 80% of working adults, 10%, at most 15%, of their tasks are exposed to AI. That's north of 2 billion working adults right away have to relearn 10% of their job immediately. And in fact, the more interesting prediction that they make, I think, is that when generative AI gets sort of turned into application-focused tools, so less a raw resource and a tool that could be good for anything, to specific applications. This is the equivalent of going from like a DC motor to a hair dryer, a drill, and a kitchen mixer that's really suited to task, that the exposure jumps up to like 45% for 80% of working adults. And practically that means that and by the way, none of that takes into account the wave of agentic AI that is now coming, i.e. Generative AI that has memory, can plan, can spin up other agents and so on, where I think we're about to hit that territory. I wrote a piece for Harvard Business Review in July on that topic. So practically, that means that this novice optional problem is going to mushroom to the size of the economy right away. And that means it is $1 trillion problem. The good news, which I haven't really focused on as much in our conversation now, and that is directly in my book and supported by research, is that in the face of all of these obstacles, I have found, and we can trust, that there are people out there who are figuring out new ways of building skill that manage around these obstacles, and we can all learn from them. They are relatively rare and they're kind of hard to find, but they are everywhere. And if we make learning from each other and handing best practices around right now a primary goal, then we can figure out the new way to learn that suits the world of work that we've got in our hands right now.
Thank you very much. I think those are really important points. So switching to robotics, certainly a large part of your work focuses on robotics. So how do you envision human beings will engage with robots in the workforce moving forward?
Right. Yeah. I would just say they are robots. It's hard for me to imagine a credible scenario in which robots represent anything other than rounding error compared to the software changes that are going on. And this is not because robots aren't becoming more stupendously capable. They are. I mean, anybody on this webinar is likely seen Figure's new robot or the 1X or a number of these other Boston Dynamics now has an entirely new Atlas type robot that's entirely has electric actuators rather than hydraulics and so on. These are all incredible advances. And for robots to be practically deployed at the scale and at the intensity in the world of work, we would have to spin up the equivalent of an auto industry to build that many units and keep them serviced and keep them on their feet, literally. And they would have to be at a price point that would be affordable for the garden variety business or consumer. So say between $15,000 and $35,000 for an extraordinary piece of hardware. And anybody who's worked in hardware, and in particular robots, knows painfully that the hardware is hard adage is really deeply true. During COVID in particular, we learned this, like your supply chain matters in a way that for ChatGPT, I mean, you can just scale and ship software digitally at almost practically no cost. Whether you can get steel or not, and whether or not your series elastic actuators are compatible with the new set of receiving components and the aluminum that you've had shipped, it can all arrive on site after a design spin and not go together, and or your needs may change. So I think in theory, it's possible for robots to have quite profound and significant economy scale impacts, but the lag in getting there is going to be an order of magnitude longer than this software thing, which hit us basically overnight. And in 2 years, it's showing no signs of slowing down. If society decided that a general purpose or multi-purpose robot were really, really valuable and desirable, I would imagine it would take something like 10 years, maybe 15, for us to see 500,000 units in service or something like that. Anybody who's saying 10 billion functioning humanoid robots is, I think the practical timeline for that, again, if society headed in that direction, would be something like 20, 25 years, unless we get breakthroughs in fabrication or, like literally synthesizing raw materials out of, raw elements or something, like dramatic breakthroughs that would constitute science fiction in terms of the physical science. The matter replicator from Star Trek kind of territory. I just figure that's 20 years off.
Well, last question before we move to some of the audience submitted questions today is going back to AI. And if we've talked about throughout today's session, there's a lot of anxiety around how AI will jobs, the economy more broad. So this technology to the greatest extent, or said another way, how, how do you help to ensure that, as you pointed out,
You cut out there a fair bit. Could you repeat the question one more time?
so with the emergence of AI and its potential impact on jobs and on the economy and workforce more broadly, how do you recommend people ensure that they utilize the technology so that it enhances their abilities rather than detracting from them or eliminating?
Right. Okay. Got it. The first third of this book is a key part of the answer to that question. So if in an uncertain and changing world where the specific skills needed, the specific conditions you might be operating in are very hard to predict and they're changing really fast, the best offering I felt that would be practically useful for a long stretch of time is to articulate that skill code so that in whatever context you're in whatever new technology, you always have a static set of criteria to go looking at a work context to try to optimize your own learning, help others learn better, and make better design decisions to enhance both outcomes and learning. And the reason that stuff is eternal is that it has to do with our wetware, like how we are physically designed and how our neurological systems function and how we build skill. It's a social process. It involves challenge and complexity, bonds between people, and so on. Those things, until we rewire ourselves, are going to be stationary. And so that's the best sort of context agnostic help I can offer. I would just say the middle third of the book keeps you awake about what the threat is to those three C's. So that's important. The back third of the book, though, is about what we could do on the upside, how we could turn this moment of challenge into a giant opportunity. In fact, that we have to. So I think I am optimistic and I am a technophile. Like in general, I think technology is beautiful and powerful, and we can and should try to use it to enhance human welfare as well as produce things that we could have never dreamed of before. And I think the same thing can be the case with respect to skill development and learning. So the back third of the book, I talk about specific ways. I am trying to now, through a startup that I've just recently co-founded and will be announcing shortly, but there are many ways of building and commercializing or just organizing to draw AI and all of these intelligent technologies into a new infrastructure for skill development that allows us to build skill better than we could before the arrival of AI. A little dose of the poison delivered differently is the key to success for all of us. And that's I think there is no way for us to learn what we need to learn as a species without making AI part of the solution. And so if you're looking for a way to sort of charge forward on this one rather than just avoid a problem, that back third of the book is for you. It's about saying, it has to be the case that we can do better than we ever could before because we produced this threat and it's arrived on our shores. So anyway, I think that if you have, to the extent you have resources or the mandate to try to paint a brighter road for people and show brighter possibilities, that's the section of the book that's going to be most appealing.
Thank you very much, Matt. So now I want to turn to some of the audience submitted and pre-submitted questions that we've received. And first question builds upon what we were just discussing. So when AI and humans work together in a way that is positive, are there patterns that you see? Or are there things that humans do better and AI excels at that are consistent across industries?
Right. So I think the main two answers to that, a sort of two-part response. Part one is that with no change to AI and robotics, you can count on the fact that, and I focus on this in a chapter of my book, there are people out there who are finding a new way to build their skill that preserves challenge, complexity, and connection. that is just really different than what people used to do to build skill in your occupation, your organization, your industry, and so on. So leaving technology constant, assuming it could be great or not, you can go find those people and learn from them. Now, in the sort of complementary territory, in my experience in the classroom as a researcher, and now that I've been talking with more organizations, the really interesting, higher risk, but higher return areas have to do with being much more aggressive about looking for complementarity and trying to find ways where that humans can do the things that they are best at, and you take AI to handle things that have to do with more routine cognitive processing, for example. And so in a practical case, I've recently been talking with a number of consultancies and firms in the financial space. There are processes in those firms that have to do with sort of updating your understanding on what's going on in the world. You know, your CFO or a partner in the firm might ask, like, why is this number, like, that's interesting. So we're off, our forecast was 84% growth and we saw 72. Why? It takes 2 to 4 weeks right now to get that answer, because you have to go through a chain of humans who are each using their own independent tools to finally get the grounded answer from the expert on the ground. That's really inefficient. If you could connect that senior expert directly with that expert on the senior manager directly with the expert on the ground, in other words, a natural language query from that senior executive, understood by AI as a question that is most relevant to someone who actually is involved with the petrochemical industry and has been on site to see how the petrochemical extraction has been going, and connects them in a match that skips that entire chain. In theory, that's allowing for that kind of interpretation to get covered, the routine interpretation. Now your challenge will be, that's a lot more efficient on paper right away. Then what about those people who are cut out of the chain? That's this second order question that I'm asking about. And that's a new and additional challenge. What about those junior people who had to go and make the call and talk to that expert and learn something in the doing? Is there a way to keep them peripherally involved in the work and doing something meaningful so that you get your faster answer? That's an example of AI-human complementarity, because interpretation is now something that these systems can handle, and matching of experts or individuals in a social graph, you can do that really fast. And then you just can ask the question now much more efficiently. Okay, we have a much more efficient work process. We've achieved a productivity gain. How and where do we help novices maintain some meaningful connections so they don't lose awareness of what our business does and how it does it? You could also use AI for that. Anyway, there's always in my experience, it's always worth asking the question, how could AI help with problem X? I'm just talking about the problem of skill development. And so anyway, in general, I think sort of the evidence right now indicates that garden variety, first pass content production or interpretation, especially labeling things, AI is really great at that. Complex problem solving, social interaction, building a bond of trust and respect, much more on the human side of the ledger. Being much more aggressive about leaning in those directions and looking for solutions that don't simply just drop AI in a sort of plug and play way to a process without really revisiting, does this process need to go that way? That's the powerful move. I think any manager in charge of strategy should be looking for ways to try for previously impossible things rather than just improving efficiency in a process without altering it.
They're really wonderful points. Thank you very much. So I know we've spent a lot of our time today talking about business and how this impacts various working relationships, but also it does obviously have an impact on our educational system. So how, with the changes in that AI and the technology is having on the workforce, do you see there changes happening for the training of students to serve as managers or related roles if they're preparing to go out into the workforce?
Right. Well, I can speak to my role as an educator for master's MBA level students. We run a one-year program called the Masters of Technology Management here at UCSB, which is roughly speaking an MBA style education, but specifically focused on technology. For elementary, pre-K, high school education, I'm neither an expert in that kind of domain, nor am I really acquainted these days. So I can't really answer for that one. But at least at sort of MBA ground zero, I have two new missions. One is to help people. I have a class, in fact, that I'm starting to teach next week. It's called Learning to Work with Intelligent Machines. And so half of that course basically is roll up your sleeves and try to use this technology to do something you would not have imagined you could do before at all. Try for something that would be impossible for you. You would just not even have given it a shot. And you will not obviously succeed or fail, but you will struggle and you will learn a lot that you will build practical expertise that is invaluable for you to lead others, to have intuitive knowledge about what hallucination really is and when it matters, what's the upside of this technology and so on. Because it's very easy to build conceptual awareness, but not real skills. So that's part one. Part two is learn about skill development and learning. These two things, I think, are, I mean, I have other skills and so on that I'm focused on, but those are the two basic ingredients. Do you actually know, and have you really struggled with and pushed yourself to solve a really hard problem with these technologies? You'll learn a lot that way. And the other is give you the meta awareness and the meta skills around cultivating and protecting skill and enhancing productivity at the same time. I keep doing this because that's a joint optimization problem. It's two axes to be focused on as a leader, as a manager in the world. And so those are the two main ingredients from my point of view.
Thank you, Matt. And I only have a couple of minutes left, so one final question, and I apologize we couldn't get to all of them. But Matt, before we wrap up, could you just share what you're most excited about in your work moving forward?
Right. Well, so I alluded to this before, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity that UCSB has granted me here to start a company. And you folks are the first, I think, that I'm going to name. I'll say the name of it. It's called SkillBench. We're not online yet. The website's not up, or it might be. Anyway, bottom line, we are building a technology, a platform for firms to be able to cost effectively measure the extent to which they're trading off between skill development and productivity as they plan for deploying generative AI, or if they're in the midst of that. How would you know unless you had a reasonably inexpensive metric to deploy in your organization? Now, inexpensive compared to hiring a large consulting firm to come in and do it manually. I think getting good measurement and data about the impact or potential impact of these technologies in business is necessary for us to find out, fine, Matt Beane, he wrote a book, but it's hard, you can't take it for granted that this is going on in your organization. You need your own data. So SkillBench is going to provide a platform to help organizations make that more informed decision, and to keep their understanding live, updated, and refreshed so that they can continue to make wise decisions about how they deploy AI. So personally, I might have professor as a title, but practically I'm startup co-founder and CEO these days, mostly. It's thrilling work. I've been through a startup before, and getting to build something and seeing its potential value. I have a demo tomorrow for an organization. I've always sort of straddled business and building and solving problems with theoretical understanding. So it's really refreshing to be back in that space.
Yeah, congratulations. It is so exciting. And of course, we wish you the absolute most success and best of luck in the new venture. So thank you very much for sharing.
Thank you.
Great. Jackie and Matt, thank you so much. Matt, we wish you the best with your company and continued success. You've given us so much to think about today. So kind of in the spirit of the session, thank you for that call for continued learning. For our alumni on the line, thank you for joining us today. When you close out of the session, you'll see a survey appear on your screen. Please go ahead and fill that out and let us know your feedback on the session today. And you can save the date on October 22nd. We'll have Professor Arnie Barnett speaking on the program. So thank you again, everybody. We'll close it out here. And thank you again, Matt. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.